And welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Thursday evening to you guys. I'm having to kick the training wheels back off of this thing again. It's been a minute since we've been on here, but you're back with another episode of Woo Fantasy right here with Rotoballer.com. I am the Roto superstar himself, Brandon Murkison, and joined by tonight fellow Rotoballer analyst Kyle Lindemann coming in, and that is at Luck is Made Fantasy Football. Kyle, welcome into the show, man. How
Hey,
you
man.
doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing good. We're one day down the combine. We got three more to go.
That is true.
All kind of on, pins and needles waiting for Saturday. We got the quarterbacks, receivers, tight ends. Everybody's just waiting to get there.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of unofficially the kickoff to the 2023 NFL season with the combine getting started, and now you're kind of in full-fledged draft mode. We're getting ready for prospects showing off on the field. Like you mentioned, today is the start. Defensive linemen, linebackers are on the field doing the drills tonight. Now tomorrow we've got the defensive backs, and then this weekend is really kind of what drives fantasy football. Is you're going to have the offensive guys coming onto the field, quarterbacks, wide receiver, tight ends, running backs, all this weekend. So that'll be something to kind of watch out for. But getting into it, and we'll get into a lot of the combine talk here in just a few minutes, but really kind of wanted to start talking with some news and notes, what happened as we've gotten into the combine this week. Obviously, one of the bigger things that happened this week, Leonard Fournette cut officially. It'll happen, of course, March 15th when the new league year starts, but he's no longer a Buck. So what say you, Kyle? What's the fantasy fallout here? You have any ideas where Leonard Fournette might land? And then we're going to look about what's Rachaad White's outlook moving forward.
I could see him winding up in Buffalo, because I don't know what the outlook's going to be with Devin Singletary being a free agent. But it sounds like they are kind of. I mean, I think we're all hoping in the fantasy community, right, that they're going to make James Cook the guy. That's what we want. Yeah, he's probably going to go to a contender. Maybe somebody that kind of needs a running back. What do you think about the Ravens? Would that be a fit?
Ravens could be a fit too. I like that. I mean, obviously, I think they're going to want to kind of take a little bit of the load off of J.K. Dobbins, even though he looked great down the stretch the last few weeks of the fantasy season in 2022. That's not a bad fit for me. I wouldn't be shocked to see him stick around in the division, possibly going to the New Orleans Saints. We do have that legal situation going on with Alvin Kamara. Who knows how that's going to play out? Missed time, suspension. We don't really have a crystal ball on that yet. See how that unfolds. But I think the Saints could possibly be in the market for running back. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a veteran coming in or if they're going to be looking towards the draft or bring another running back in. But that was kind of my immediate thought, was a potential landing spot was going to the Saints there.
No, that's good too. And he played. I don't know where he's from, but I think he's from Florida. But he played obviously at LSU.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the hardest one to figure out is Rachaad White, because he's such a good receiver, and people were kind of down on him last year, but Tampa's offensive line stunk. I mean, Ali Marpet retired. The center Ryan Jensen was out for much of the year. I believe they had, I think their right guard was hurt. I mean, their offensive line was so bad they couldn't run the ball. So
yeah, dead last in the league.
Yeah, I do like Rachaad White, but what does it mean? Who's their quarterback and who they bringing in? So that one is tough. That's probably the hardest. If you're in a dynasty league, that's probably the hardest question of the offseason right now, whether I keep Rachaad White or do I move him.
Yeah. I mean, personally, if I am a manager with Rachaad White on the roster, I think I'm moving him immediately at this point in time, just to see what's out there, what that market value might be on him. Because let's be honest, the shelf life of running backs, you're probably not going to see his value get that much higher than what it could be potentially right now, just from the talks of what he could do in that offense. But you mentioned it too. That's a big takeaway for me, is if they go with Kyle Trask in 2023 and maybe sit a year in kind of tank, so to speak. I don't see that offense getting to a point to where Rachaad White can improve his value.
Yeah.
23.
No, and it's interesting you bring that up because last week I actually talked to Greg Auman from The Athletic, who's the Bucks beat writer. Get to talk to him on occasion, and he basically said, in a perfect world, they would love Derek Carr or Jimmy Garoppolo, but Tampa's, they're still over the cap right now, and they got 13 days to get under. When Brady retired, because he didn't wait until June 1st to file his retirement paperwork, the Bucks got stuck with $35 million in dead cap. So, because the early years of Brady's contract, he was making next to nothing. They kept deferring the money so they could keep the window open. Well, now the bills come due. So that one's tough. So I actually think if they do go with Trask, I could see them bringing in Baker Mayfield or Jacoby Brissett. And Brissett was actually pretty good last year. Well, I don't want to say pretty good, but he was better than we thought he would be.
Right. Yeah, he was serviceable for the Browns for sure for the most part of that season before Deshaun Watson came in. I saw that mentioned somewhere else previously too, Baker Mayfield potentially coming down to Tampa Bay. I personally, I think that would be a good fit bringing in Baker there. Obviously they've formally cut Jameis Winston down there now, or Saints have, is what I mean. There's been some talk of the Jameis Winston reunion coming back to Tampa. I think that's a little bit far fetched, but no, I like Baker.
Yeah.
I think that could be a potential good fit there.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And the intel I've done kind of suggests, Bruce Arians kind of really just a figurehead.
Mm-hmm.
Jason Light is really the one that's kind of making the personnel decisions. So,
speaking of Jason Light, that's a tale of life comes at you fast. Is him at the podium at the combine earlier this week talking about Leonard Fournette and that he has many years left, and then 4 or 5 hours later you get the transaction where he's cut. You got to love that general manager speak out in public with the media.
Yeah, and he, to his credit, I think he's done a great job as general manager. He hasn't been good at drafting quarterbacks. Like, he put together a nice roster, but they were obviously limited until Brady got there. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, because I pretty much just about all of Mike Evans' contract for next year is fully guaranteed. So I want to say they have much more to lose if they cut him. So they're kind of in a tough spot because, the NFC South obviously was the worst division in football last year. And we know how quickly things in the NFL could change. But, like, I don't know, even if they tried to tank, if they could be bad at, like, obviously they would be bad, but I don't know if I see them being like a bottom 3 team in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which that would be the goal, you would assume, is get back in the quarterback conversation next year when you've got Caleb Williams and Drake May potentially coming out. Those are likely to be the top 2 picks in the draft next year. All things staying the same as they are right now. But it's a tough situation down there, Tampa. You mentioned the salary cap; that's a tough thing too. They just don't have a lot of wiggle room right now. Not a lot of ways to improve the roster after Tom Brady has left them hanging.
Yeah, and obviously it makes it harder when you're over the cap.
Right. You have restructures you can do, and move money around here and there, like a lot of teams tend to do, and turn it into signing bonus money and things like that. But I'm not sure that you can do that with much of how much they are over the cap right now.
Yeah, the Saints are obviously the best at doing it. Basically they, for everyone listening at home, if you want to free up cap space, basically you convert a player's base salary for the upcoming season into a signing bonus. Then you can take the signing bonus and spread it out over 3 or 4 years instead of 1 year. Now the Saints have gotten away with it because their 2017 draft class was so good, and they typically have drafted well.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't keep doing it if the guys you keep doing that with, if they fall off. The worst thing you want is when you're stuck with, $30-40 million in a guy, and like the Colts with Matt Ryan. He's pretty much done at this point. But
yes,
I believe that they're still stuck with like $25 million in dead cap or something. If they, so they're kind of stuck now.
Yeah.
Like I said, the Saints have been good at it. I think in their mind, they think, okay, the salary cap's going to keep going up every year. We can keep doing these gymnastics. But man, that's a lot of work every off season.
Yeah, it puts your account every single year when you're looking at the money like that. But speaking of being stuck with bad contracts, switching over to the Dallas Cowboys, I wanted to kind of touch on them real quick before we get into the combine talk. Obviously, yeah, they've got the decision to make between Tony Pollard, whether or not you sign him to a long-term deal or not you franchise tag him or let him walk. But like I mentioned, being stuck with a bad contract, you have Ezekiel Elliott, and talks are that they're possibly going to restructure his contract if he wants to take a deep enough pay cut and stay with the team. Otherwise, we will be cutting him. But the biggest news with the Cowboys, I obviously came out yesterday with Mike McCarthy at the podium talking about offensive philosophy and that he wants to run the damn ball. So it's not it's not the best thing you want to hear, A, as a Cowboys fan, as myself, and B, from a fantasy perspective. You don't want to hear a head coach coming out and saying that they want to change to a run-based offense like that, like McCarthy mentioned yesterday.
Yeah. Well, wasn't that interesting, right? When he got fired from Green Bay, he spent all this time in an underground bunker with his staff, and we were
Yeah.
for following trends in the NFL, and we're going to evolve.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you really haven't evolved, Mike.
Not at all.
And I don't think he's as bad of a coach as he's kind of made out to be, but there's definitely parts of him that's like definitely way too stubborn. I think, and the Cowboys really missed Amari Cooper last year down the stretch. I almost think if, not to rub salt in your wounds here, but I really think if they would have had Amari Cooper in that 49ers game, I really think that they could have won that.
Yeah.
It's almost like they should have kept Amari and they paid Michael Gallup instead. And Michael Gallup had a really, really nasty injury at the end of the 2021 season. So yeah. He should be better this year. I mean, when you have a bad injury like that, it almost kind of seemed like they tried to rush him back a little bit, and he did not look the same, nowhere near as explosive, as he's been. Yeah, it's tough because I feel like the Cowboys are kind of in a good window right now. They're knocking on the door. They just need to get over the hump.
Yeah, and that's kind of the bugaboo with that team. I mean, it's honestly, you can kind of say that they've been cursed for the better part of the last 26 seasons. Is there's glimpses of hope every once in a while there, but you just can't get over the hump, like you mentioned. But yeah, that situation. I mean, we talked about it ad nauseum last summer after the Amari Cooper trade was made here on this podcast. Is just, I think if they would have sat and in a vacuum, probably wait another 2 to 3 weeks and see how the wide receiver market unfolded and some other trades that were made. I mean, 5th round pick, what you got back for Amari Cooper, you have to have just been kicking yourself later on when you find that out. But I agree with you. I think that was a big part of the offense that just was not there from a consistency standpoint last year. Was just the fact that, I mean, he was really a reliable target for Dak Prescott in that offense. And obviously a lot of those targets switched over to CeeDee Lamb, who we saw had a big year last year in 2022. But now you just have absolute holes in that offense. I mean, your running game is going to have to change. Your wide receivers, you're going to have to add to that group because obviously Michael Gallup, like you mentioned, hopefully a year removed from the injury, he gets a little bit of a step back. But outside of that, I don't see him as a true wide receiver 2 in that offense. I think we're going to need to bring in someone there. Not to mention you're losing Dalton Schultz possibly too, who's a free agent. So, I mean, there's a lot of things to be done in Dallas for the Cowboys to really improve. And I just don't like what we're hearing from Mike McCarthy as things are heading into the offseason. And it's just not a good look per se from a fantasy perspective, especially.
Yeah, and I didn't necessarily like getting rid of Kellen Moore too. I felt like Kellen Moore was good.
And I think that was a bit of the, you mentioned with Mike McCarthy being stubborn. I think that was behind the scenes. I think they butt heads, those two, because Kellen Moore was a guy similar to what we did with Jason Garrett years and years ago that showed promise as an offensive coordinator. Jerry Jones gets in his head that, hey, we got to do whatever we can to keep this guy here. Mike McCarthy inherited Kellen Moore, and I just don't know if he was truly comfortable with Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator, and I think they just kind of couldn't get out of each other's way. And so now we're really going to see what Mike McCarthy can do with an offense with Moore out of the way and over with the Chargers now, who I expect really going to take a step forward as an offense now with Kellen Moore over there.
Yeah, just need Jackson Smith and Jigba to go to the Chargers, and all their problems will be solved.
Yes. So let's get into it. Let's talk some combine.
Okay.
Obviously, we mentioned it at the top of the show. We had the defensive linemen and the linebackers hitting the field for drills today. Obviously, the big talk of Twitter throughout the evening tonight is the Nolan Smith performance on the field with the 4.39 official 40 time for a defensive lineman. My goodness. So outside of Nolan Smith, who are some guys that you really were impressed by on the field tonight?
I think it's also too. I was talking about this a little bit earlier. Computer issues. The I think it's kind of a testament to how deep this draft class is. That there's probably not a Jamar Chase. Maybe there's not a Micah Parsons. There's not a Trevor Lawrence in this class. I think Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are stars. They're studs. Quarterback, I think, there's probably 2 or 3 guys everyone's kind of fighting over. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a really deep class. Like if you're like, this is the kind of draft I would trade back into the second round. And then if I didn't have a second round pick, I would try to trade up, because I feel like that 15 to 45 range just has so many good players.
Yeah.
So I would say, Trent Simpson from Clemson really improved his stock today, because I've been big on this Drew Sanders kid from Arkansas, but he didn't run today. And maybe he doesn't need to, but Trent Simpson, he ran awesome today for a linebacker. He's kind of more of a coverage guy. This Kalijah Cansey, this defensive tackle from Pitt, I believe he was 6'1", 283, and he had the fastest 40 time. Not that, for defensive linemen, it's more the 20-yard split that we want to be more focused in, because most of these guys are not running 40 yards.
No.
But it does say how good of athletes they are. I'm going to botch his name, but there's the Adetomiwa Adebawore from Northwestern
kid,
defensive tackle. Oh, he went off today.
Right.
Lucas Van Ness from Iowa, I think he kind of showed
he was steady.
Everybody.
Yeah. I was going to say he looked good. Yeah.
So I think, like I said, this is a deep class, and that's probably for those of us doing the mock drafts is what's going to make it tough, because like I said, that 20 to early second round, these teams could really go either way. And I think you got a handful of teams in there, kind of like the Cowboys, kind of like Dallas, Kansas City, where they don't necessarily have a pressing need. Philadelphia too. Mm-hmm. Philadelphia probably going to go corner at 10, but a lot of these teams can go best player available. So that kind of complicates things. But I would say those guys, even Jalen Carter to a degree, the fact that he was able to, post bail or whatever, show up at the combine was good. I don't know kind of what's going to happen with that, and then I would say Byron Young would be another guy who really improved his stock today.
Yeah, Byron Young looked amazing, really across all drills. 4.53 in the 40, just blazing speed. But a lot of those agility drills that they did on the field, he looked great. Just a guy coming out of another great athlete coming out of Tennessee. That's we started to see the last couple of years. That team's kind of really putting some great draft talent out there the last couple of years. But I agree with you that, that's just, there's so much stockpile of talent down there towards the bottom end of the first round and into the second that it's going to be hard to really kind of pinpoint a player to a team once you get into those 20s as far as mock drafts and stuff goes. So the last couple mock drafts that I've looked at, and one that I've done myself, obviously, I've had Trenton Simpson going to the Cowboys at 26, and based on what he did today, I'm not sure he's going to be there. So that's one thing to look at. But you mentioned Jalen Carter, and obviously the situation got in trouble with the reckless driving situation down there in Georgia, had to go post bail, got released, was back at the combine today. He's a wild card now at this point. You have to imagine. What do we expect to see with Jalen Carter as far as in that upper tier of talent in the first round?
I think if he's there at 6, I think Detroit will be sprinting to the podium. That's
right.
I mean, I can't see him falling that far because, I mean, Dan Campbell and why is his name Brad Holmes?
Yeah.
Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, really kind of pride themselves on being a physical football team. They want to build their defense. Detroit's offense was great last year. They did release Michael Brockers, and 2 years ago they drafted this Levi Onwuzurike guy, and he missed all of last season, so they haven't really got a ton from him. So, I mean, I think if Jalen Carter was still there at 6, the Lions would be going nuts because he just kind of fits really what they're looking for, and they have 4 picks in the top, I think, 49. So
yeah,
they can obviously afford to take a little bit more risk with that. So I can't imagine he would fall further than that. I would be stunned.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, that's just, you can't really refuse a player's talent, even with some of the things that are going on the last couple of days with him. I think I agree with you. I don't think he's going to fall too far. Obviously we had a lot of discourse about it, and with a lot of the guys with Rotoballer, we had some discussion back and forth about it. But outside of that, we'll get into the quarterbacks. We mentioned deep class, but there's just not really those standout guys, and I think you kind of really can say that with the quarterbacks here as we get into the quarterback class, is because depending on who you talk to, Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, the wild card of Anthony Richardson right now, and how that's going to play out. I mean, it's just, I think there's these guys you can really kind of just pick and choose who you would like there. For you, who's your top quarterback in this class coming in?
So I've got CJ Stroud 1A. I've got Bryce Young 1B.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really concerned about the height for Bryce Young. He had very few passes batted at the line of scrimmage. He sees the field very well, and he's very good at finding the open throwing lanes. Like, he is so good at that.
Yeah.
So, and part of me thinks if Bryce Young's height was an issue, it would have shown up already. I mean, this guy's playing in the SEC every Saturday. It's not like this guy's playing in the MAC or Conference USA. And not that we want to bash those conferences, but, like, you know what I mean? And, like, he lost a lot of his best players. I mean, he really didn't have anybody to throw to this year. I mean, he had Jahmyr Gibbs, but, like, Alabama's 2 leading receivers had like 600 yards apiece. So, I mean, it wasn't like he's out there throwing to Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith and Henry Ruggs and who was the other guy? Oh, Jerry Jeudy. They had all 4 of those guys at once.
Right. Yeah.
So I think what more people are concerned with is the size. Like, what's he going to weigh in? Dane Brugler kind of predicted 5'10 and a half, 194. I think that would be great. If he's in at 194, I think that's great. If he's 5'9 and a half, 185.
Then you got some concern.
Yeah, I think the question is, does he have the durability to hold up for a full season? If he's got a 330-pound defensive lineman barreling down on him. But Bryce is tough, and he's just so mechanically sound. I mean, it's just, there's really not a flaw in his game other than his size. I mean, I've gone through hours upon hours of his tape just trying to find something to not like about this kid. And it's just not there. I mean, there's just so many things about him to like. CJ Stroud's kind of got a little bit more untapped potential. He really didn't use his legs much at all until that final bowl game against Georgia, where he was just running everywhere.
Yes.
And that was awesome to see. He's very accurate. He probably makes like the 20-yard sideline throw like better than anyone I've ever seen, like, in college football. Like, he can
effortless.
he can just drop the ball like perfectly in the bucket. So, obviously he had great receivers, but receivers aren't why he was accurate. So for him, I kind of have him 1A because the size is not a concern. And I still feel like he's got a little bit of untapped upside because of his rushing. So
yeah,
I've got both of the, if someone told me that they had Young ahead of them, it's not going to upset me. But I've got those guys ahead. I think the next two guys are what really kind of makes it tough.
Yeah, agreed. I'm with you. I've got Stroud ahead of Young currently. My concern, I think, with Bryce Young, obviously, I think the landing spot right now, if he goes to the Houston Texans, if we look at it from a fantasy perspective, I'm a little concerned because you don't see the talent around him that he'll be. It's offensive line's going to be an issue. We're talking about a durability thing. I think you'll have a little bit of an issue there. So that's concerning to me, but I like him. You talked about going through his film. I did the same thing. I mean, just the fact that what he can do as far as creatively in the pocket, it moves around certain ways just to kind of create that space and find those open throwing lanes. I think that's what he does really, really well. But the reason I had Stroud ahead of him, like you mentioned, there's not the size concern, but it's also I just think he's a more polished quarterback prospect as things are currently standing. But the dichotomy, like we mentioned it, Bryce Young this last year did not have those outstanding receivers around him, but CJ Stroud the last couple of years in college, that's all he's had, has been outstanding wide receivers to kind of play with and be surrounded by the last couple of years. So I don't think you can go wrong with either one, depending on where they land. I like them, but you mentioned the same thing too. Like, and this is after those top two. What are we looking at after those top two?
Yeah. Well, it's a variety of things. So teams really didn't do anything because they didn't like the 2022 quarterback class.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously Kenny Pickett will be starting, but the other guys, they're all kind of up in the air. I really did like Sam Howell. I had him higher than consensus. I was surprised that he fell as far as he did. So I would be curious to see if he gets a shot, but this is kind of the perfect storm because obviously Brady, retiring, if Rodgers is moved, teams are getting desperate.
Yeah.
And Carolina's one, the Colts are the other. I mean, from all the reports I've gotten out of Indianapolis, like Jim Irsay is just haunted by Andrew Luck being retired. I mean, he's just like beside himself and like, we got to get the next guy, which it actually, if as long as they don't give up, a ton, I think it could actually be a good landing spot. I like what Shane Steichen did with Justin Herbert his rookie year with the Chargers. Then he moved over to Philly and he did some good things with Jalen Hurts the last 2 years. So I'm intrigued by that. From what I get out of Carolina, David Tepper's kind of grown impatient as well because they've, since they moved on from Cam, they've really just tried to recycle quarterbacks and it just hasn't worked.
Right.
They were so excited in the beginning for Matt Rule. Like I remember when halfway through Matt Rule's first season, everyone thought this guy was like the second coming. And then it was like 2 years later, they couldn't get rid of him fast enough. That makes it tough. So I think need at the quarterback position is always going to push up demand. I also think teams are getting smarter. I think teams realize that you can never have enough quarterbacks. I mean, if you look at like what Philadelphia did with Jalen Hurts, they could have stood pat with Carson Wentz. Obviously they didn't, so I think teams, valuing quarterbacks maybe more than they did 5 years ago. So, but it's, you got a bunch of teams like the Raiders. Like, what are they going to do if they don't get Jimmy Garoppolo or Aaron Rodgers? I mean, they're probably going to draft a quarterback.
Yeah.
The Colts are drafting a quarterback. I mean, the Texans really should. I've heard a few murmurs. Maybe they're going to punt another year, but I almost just wonder if they're leaking that because they're trying not to get fleeced in a trade, maybe.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the thing too. You got D'Amico Ryans taking over as head coach down there. I think he's going to want to really come in with a quarterback and kind of really rebuild from the ground up.
Yeah.
With the talent down there, and I'm like,
they get Bryce Young. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was gonna say like that's just the thing. I think the Colts and the Texans are for sure the two major glaring two teams that are going to be going after quarterback in the top 5 of the draft here. It's just a matter of where they take the quarterback, where they're going to be at. Are they going to move up? How's the trade going to be completed? What, everything, there's a lot of different dynamics at play right now. So But I agree. I think the Texans right now, it just seems like a lot that they get Bryce Young. I don't know, things could change, but it just seems like that's kind of going to be the landing spot is Bryce Young to the Texans right now.
Yeah, I mean, and it wouldn't be a horrible landing spot. I mean, they have a second first-round pick. They have the Browns 2024 first. They're the only team that has multiple 2024 firsts right now.
Mm-hmm.
They got a ton of cap space. I think sometimes I just question Caserio. I mean, he took Derek Stingley one pick ahead of Sauce Gardner last year. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, not that we're going to give up on Derek Stingley because he has the upside, but I just think I was like, man, how did you miss on that? You know?
Yeah, that was a tough call, especially in hindsight and seeing how Sauce played throughout the 2022 season.
Yeah, I would like John Mechie as like a deep dynasty and redraft sleeper if they get Bryce Young, because those two already have the chemistry.
Yep, have a rapport.
And I think everybody kind of forgot about Mechie because he missed the season. Now, hopefully, he's recovered and healthy. You know,
and I mean that could go a long way to helping out with a little bit of the wide receiver issue. Obviously, they've got Nico Collins, kind of the size, outside receiver. Odds are Brandon Cooks will be on the move. There'll be a trade there. I can't see him sticking around there. So there's a need there, and like you mentioned, John Mechie could be a guy that fills a little bit of a void there with the team at wide receiver. But
what they really should do is go quarterback receiver with their first two picks. I mean, that's what common sense says to do. I mean,
that's what I would do.
Yeah, I mean the Jets. I mean, the Jets did it absolutely the right way. They did absolutely everything in their power to help Zach Wilson succeed. He just wasn't the guy. But that doesn't mean that what they did was bad. I mean, obviously what they did with Wilson was bad, but their whole approach to the process was completely correct.
Now, what you mentioned, Zach Wilson, a lot of comparisons of Zach Wilson to Will Levis right now. There's a little bit of that out there. A guy that's looked great on film. There's definitely some tape where he has that amazingly strong arm, but if you look at from a production standpoint, the numbers just don't play out the way you want to see it. And you can make a case. Obviously the talent around him at Kentucky, especially this last year, he took a step back from an assessment standpoint. If you really kind of look at his tape between 21 to 22. But how are you shaking out on Will Levis currently right now?
I mean, I could see why people like him. I mean, he's a gritty player. He's got the size. He's got the arm. He looks the part. When you see Will Levis, I mean, he looks the part. But I also think you got a lot of the old heads like Mel Kiper that if a quarterback's not 6'4" and 225, he's like, I don't want him. And the game has changed. I don't think you need to be 6'4", 230 to survive in the NFL. I think we've proven guys could survive smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bryce Young's probably pushing that envelope a little more than people are comfortable with. But
yes,
as far as Will Levis goes, I mean, that's hard because a lot of reports and, someone that I listen a lot to is Dane Brugler, because I just feel like he's so good and he's so plugged in on this stuff. And, he's saying that, Will Levis pretty much had an injured foot for like most of the year. And he had a bum shoulder that this guy really shouldn't have been playing. So I'm kind of take that with a grain of salt that, Will Levis was really hobbled this year.
Yep.
And he's playing in the SEC. I think I might be a Big Ten guy, but I'm not, I'm not dumb enough to, or I'm not biased enough to know, to think that, that the SEC isn't the best conference, because we know that it is. But, I mean, he's playing against much better competition than Zach Wilson played. I think concern is you look at Will Levis's stats, and he definitely padded his stats in non-SEC games. He did better when he had Wan'Dale Robinson, obviously, but it's not like Wan'Dale Robinson is like, Justin Jefferson. I mean, he's good, but it's not like. So yeah, he's tough because he's so up and down. I think what I worry about with him is not having enough touch on his throws. He just winds up and throws like a million miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
He does remind me in a little bit of a little bit more mobile Baker Mayfield. That he's just got that gunslinger mentality. He's just going to drop back and he's just going to be like, well, screw it. I got to make a play.
Yeah.
In the NFL, that'll work sometimes, but you can't. It's not something you can consistently get away with. So he's tough. I think, if he has a decent landing spot, like maybe he goes to Carolina with Frank Reich and he's got DJ Moore, and I don't know. I don't want to be one of those people. I think the community's really been down on Will Levis.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not one of those people who's immediately says, this guy's a bust, he stinks. I have some concerns about Will Levis, but at the same time I can see why people like him. So
yeah,
that one is tough. That's a tough evaluation.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm very hot and cold with Will Levis. It's hard to really kind of pinpoint the true player that you're going to get with him coming out, the 21 version or the 22. Like you mentioned, you touched on, it's just that touch is something that's just not there, and that's something he's going to have to work on at the next level, because you're going to have that there. And it's just, odds are that there's going to be a lot of more turnover-worthy plays that you're going to see from Will Levis just because of that lack of touch. But moving on to obviously the biggest wild card, and like I mentioned a few minutes ago, Anthony Richardson. I mean, you've got that guy at opposite ends of the spectrums, depending on who you talk to right now in the community. I'm one that I'm just not that high on him. I think that there's some flashes of brilliance. Obviously, the athleticism is just out of this world, and I think we're mesmerized by that right now. But I think he's definitely a project that will have to progress at the next level from a true quarterbacking standpoint. And for me, that gives me a little bit of a pause and to take a step back with him.
Well, I think it makes it hard, but I also think if this Anthony Richardson, hype comes to fruition, he does go top 10.
Mm-hmm.
Then
I think if he runs an amazing 40, you're definitely seeing him in the top 10 for sure.
I mean, but I think it would also kind of, signify a little bit of a fundamental change in the NFL, because I just think a lot of organizations don't want to develop a quarterback. They want they want someone that's a finished product. But and I've had this conversation with people, like, look, if you're in the AFC, I mean, you got to go against Patrick Mahomes. You got to go against Joe Burrow.
Mm-hmm.
You got to go against Justin Herbert. You got to go against Trevor Lawrence. You got to go against Deshaun Watson. You got to go against Lamar Jackson. I mean,
it's a murderer's row over in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's healthy in that system, Tua Tagovailoa, I mean, I'm sure I'm missing somebody else. I mean, it's just it's a very good conference. So I think it's like, I think teams are looking, Josh Allen.
Yep.
That's the guy I missed, of course. But that's the guy we're comparing him to. It was like, if I'm going to go toe to toe with that in a playoff game, I need someone that can hang. So, part of the problem is the NFL is very short sighted. It's always about what can you do for me now? What have you done for me lately?
Right.
No, teams really don't. In the olden days, I remember, my dad telling me, like, back in the 70s and 80s, like, a team would draft a quarterback and he would sit for like 4 years before he would play. And it's like, that doesn't happen now. I mean, obviously you have Jordan Love, but Jordan Love obviously stuck behind a Hall of Famer, so it's a little different scenario.
Yeah, the Packers are the only team that continues to do that, with Aaron Rodgers behind Favre, Jordan Love behind Aaron Rodgers. That's the thing there.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. You have that strategy that seems to be the one in play right now, is that you've got to get your quarterback and you've got to get him on the field, and you have that 4-year window where you can build around that quarterback on that quarterback contract, add in talent around him. That's your window to go get a Super Bowl. And we're seeing that across the league now, is once you're paying that secondary quarterback contract, that's when kind of the wheels start to fall off a little bit around the team, and they're just not a title contender. It's weird to see like a team like Kansas City's continued to do it with Patrick Mahomes getting paid the money he's getting paid, but odds, I mean, most of the teams you see, these secondary quarterback contracts, they're just not as competitive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in on Richardson in the right situation. I actually think the best fit for him would be in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell, because if he was behind Kirk Cousins, he doesn't really have to play.
Right.
You could sprinkle some plays in for him in the goal line and short yardage, maybe put him in for like one series a game, just to kind of get his feet wet, have him kind of sit, almost kind of like how Patrick Mahomes did behind Alex Smith. I mean, I think those situations could be very similar. Now, and most of the intel I've got out of Minnesota suggests that they're going defense with their first pick. They don't have a second round pick. So
Yeah.
it's kind of tough because I feel like Minnesota really thinks that they can, potentially get to the NFC Championship, get to the Super Bowl with kind of how wide open the NFC is right now. So it would be tough for them to draft somebody who's not going to help them this year. But I do think that would be the perfect landing spot. I don't think he's going to be ready to step in day one. I mean,
No, I don't
some
either.
people have said, oh, he's, try to compare him to Cam Newton or try to compare him to Lamar Jackson. I don't think those comparisons are fair because, I mean, man, I remember back in like 2010, like Cam Newton just dominated college football. He was unstoppable. You could not stop him. And Lamar Jackson, in a similar degree, I mean, it was like he was rushing for over 1,000 yards and he was throwing for 3,500 passing yards. He was like playing a video game. So those guys,
lofty expectations.
I mean, Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson could get to that level, but I mean, those guys were so much more accomplished than he was at this stage of his career. It's so tough because Florida had a new head coach this year, and I don't necessarily know that they knew how to use him perfectly either,
Right.
So that's kind of a tough situation. People are like, oh, why doesn't he stay for another year? But that goes back to what we said about Caleb Williams and Drake May. Even if Anthony Richardson stays for his senior year and has a great year, he's still not going to be better than QB3 off the board next year. So it was like, why stay in school?
Yeah, I agree with you. How do you feel about Daniel Jeremiah put out his mock draft earlier in the week and had Richardson going to the Lions at 18? How do you feel about that landing spot?
That would be an amazing landing spot. I would love that because he doesn't have to play right away. I think Goff would understand, hey, I need to up my game if I want to keep, this job.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know that he's going to, I don't know if he's going to fall that far from
the way it sounds right now.
We're hearing, and a lot of the issues with Richardson from what I've seen are actually footwork related, that he, as a quarterback, when you drop back to pass, you really want your body, you want your feet to be pointed in the direction of the receiver. He would have his feet pointed in like the complete opposite direction.
He's falls off a lot of his throws, kind of moving backwards on throws.
But he has a really good arm, and he knows how to put touch on the ball. I think for him, I was encouraged by watching his tape because I felt like he knew what the right read was. He knew where to go with the ball, even if he missed. The combine will be interesting because, the quarterbacks are going to throw and run in alphabetical order. So Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud are going to be right next to each other.
Yep.
So that'll be interesting because if Richardson comes out and he's missing everybody, and then Stroud comes out and is just dropping every pass in the bucket,
changes your perception. Really,
that's going to be that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah. And speaking of last week, I want to talk on at quarterback before we kind of move into the running backs and wide receivers. Joe Stevens chimes in. I like Hendon Hooker. I think everyone's sleeping on him. Rest assured, Joe, I am not sleeping on Hendon Hooker. I love Hendon Hooker and what his ability could be coming into the NFL. I obviously Vols fan here, watched every snap of Hendon Hooker the last 2 years there in college. I obviously is just bad timing with the ACL injury at the end of the year. I like what he can do and bring to the NFL at the next level. He was a guy that, those rumblings you mentioned with the Texans, punting at the position in the first round. Hooker was a guy I thought you could wait on into the second round, possibly third round, and grab him, and he'd be ready to go, possibly earlier into the season this year. Where are you at with Hendon Hooker before we kind of move on?
I was really intrigued pre-ACL. He throws a nice ball.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to some people about this week. In a perfect world, every draft prospect would be a 21-year-old early declare, true junior. But, I think we have to remember how much COVID impacted college football in 2020, and it really impacted player development.
Yep.
Even like the Pac-12, they only played 6 games in 2020. So a lot of these guys, we want them to be 21, 22 when they come out. Quarterback is different. Sometimes guys just have their light bulb moment. And I don't want to compare anybody to Joe Burrow because I feel like Joe Burrow is kind of a little bit of an outlier to the quarterback scouting / development process. But like, I mean, Joe Burrow, he really wasn't anybody for 3 years, and then all of a sudden he transfers to LSU, has this light bulb moment, and he was just, I don't know what happened. I mean, and nobody does. So I think with Hooker, I'm intrigued by the athleticism. I feel like he throws a nice ball. I mean,
Yep.
he does. I mean, he can be accurate. Doesn't have any character issues. Seems to be a leader. I think that's probably the biggest disadvantage that we're at this week, because not only are we not at the combine, but like we're not in the interview rooms with these quarterbacks, because there's so many intangibles, leadership, can this quarterback, recognize coverage? Can he memorize, the things I just told him? The teams are doing that to all these guys in the interview process. So, like I said, we're at a disadvantage. I'm definitely intrigued by Hooker. He's someone I do see the upside for him. I think it's what he's going to be 25. So I think if you draft him, he really needs to play.
Yeah, he'll need to step in early, but I think he's a prime candidate to go to a team where he play behind a bridge quarterback where he'll take over and possibly 2024. I think that's his best option as things are kind of going into the drafting process.
What about Baltimore for him?
Baltimore would be amazing. I mean, we mentioned it. He has a sneaky athleticism. The guy's mobile. He can get up and down the field. He breaks contain quite easily. He can really run. A lot of people they don't really realize that with him. He put up the video game type numbers throwing the ball in that Josh Heupel wide open offense, but the guy can get up the field in a hurry when he breaks contain. That's definitely something I like about Hooker. He has that all-around athleticism you really want to see with a quarterback in today's NFL, the way things are played today. Like we mentioned, we don't want those old statue mythic type of quarterbacks you mentioned, like Mel Kiper loves. But
that's kind of Tanner McKee, the kid out of Stanford, to a degree.
Yes, that is exactly. I mean, that's your prototypical Stanford quarterback most of the time too. Right. Moving into running back, obviously Bijan, he's the end all be all at this running back position. I'm not sure that there's much that we can really say about Bijan other than the fact that he's going to go in the first round. We just don't know where yet. But outside of Bijan at the running back position, who are your top guys that you're really kind of keeping an eye on, that you're landing spot wise, what you're expecting, guys that you're really hoping can pan out early on in the NFL?
Well, I'm a big Jahmyr Gibbs guy. I think he's going to show out this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
He's not really much of a pass blocker. He's probably one of the worst pass blocking running backs I've seen in a long time. But I don't think teams are really going to have him out there to pass block. They want this guy because he's such a dynamic receiver. He's really fleet-footed. He does give me some Alvin Kamara vibes, man. I really like him. He's my running back 2. I don't really have a consensus running back 3 at this point. I think
that's when things change. Yeah, I agree.
There's a lot of things I really like about Zach Charbonnet, but what's he going to run? I think, I'm not one of those people that obsesses about a 40 time, but running back, I mean, you really want your running back to be the best athlete on the field, because he's the guy that's got to run away from everybody.
Right.
So
and one thing I saw with Charbonnet, just to kind of cut in real quick, is that I mean, obviously, we're really wanting to see speed wise what he does on the 40. But for me, watching a lot of the film, when he gets out in open space, he went down on first contact quite a bit. First tackler took him down quite a bit from what I saw. So if you get him out in space, that's something that I think is going to be concerning with him. Big north-south runner. I think he's going to be a guy that really has to kind of build up that momentum and have a good offensive line in front of him. I think that's going to be what I'm looking at with Charbonnet moving into the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I really like Devin A-Chain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's lightning in a bottle. I mean, this guy is fast.
Yes.
Well, I think what I really like about him, he runs hard. And he's not someone that goes down on first contact either. I was like amazed at, like, he's not a big guy, but I was amazed at like how well he can like break free from tacklers and get out of tacklers. I feel like he plays bigger than he is, but I'm curious to see how he weighs in. I feel like if he's under that 190 this weekend, I wonder if teams are going to be a little concerned. But I mean, he's got some big playability.
Right, and he's going to be utilized really a lot as more of kind of that pass catching back out of the backfield, so kind of your third down specialist in the NFL. There could be some early down work for A-Chain, kind of spelling and coming in and being kind of a committee type back, but I think his biggest advantage is going to be coming in the passing game.
Yeah.
Then outside of that, I am myself a big fan of Sean Tucker. You see a lot of mixed emotions with Sean Tucker, what he can possibly do at the next level. But that kid's kind of just a pure football player. There's speed there. He can avoid tackles. He does kind of make tacklers miss in the open field. But he's a kid runs hard too. You mentioned that with Devin A-Chain. He runs hard, can run inside, outside. I think he's kind of got all aspects of the running game down. I like what he can do at the next level in the right landing spot. That's a guy that I've kind of got my eye on right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I'd say for me, I've been getting a lot of buzz about this Israel.
Abinaconda?
Abinaconda from Pitt.
Late bloomer. Definitely a late bloomer. Had a breakout season this last year, and big bodied guy, but a lot of speed to him.
Mm-hmm.
I liked him too. I'm with you there. I think a lot of people are going to be intrigued what we see with Tank Bigsby though at the combine this week. I think people are really wanting intrigued to see what he does as far as speed wise.
Right.
That's one guy to look out for as well. And I think building on a strong Senior Bowl performance, I got my eye on Eric Gray coming out of Oklahoma too. Former Vol, obviously transferred over to Oklahoma. I think there's a little bit of, he's kind of a sleeper for me in this class, a guy that you can get further down the board, probably a day 3 type running back. But I think he might be able to fill in somewhere and kind of carve out a role early on in the NFL.
Yeah.
Any other running back for you?
No.
We kind of mentioned it. I mean, it's just, after those top 2 with Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, it's just
maybe that Tajay Spears kid. He kind of got
that buzz out of the Senior Bowl himself.
Senior Bowl, so I'm kind of intrigued to see how he goes. But it's a very deep running back class, so I think
deep, but not. It doesn't feel like there's that 3 down roll type of guy in this class other than Bijan. That's the thing for me. I mean, there might be a guy that can eventually fit that mold. But
right.
Like you mentioned, they're so deep in this class. I think there's a lot of guys that have the ability to exceed at the next level. It's going to be hard to see it, as it is every single year when we come into the draft. It's landing spot dependent. Where are these guys going to fall to? What's their role going to be in the offense early on? So, now obviously, kind of the same thing we talked about with quarterback a minute ago. You want these guys to come in, and you want them to play, and you want them to play well early on their rookie deals, because shelf life of a running back the way it is right now, and not to mention the fact this is one of the biggest free agent running back classes in the NFL this year too, with guys like Saquon, Josh Jacobs out there. There's a lot of moving parts of where these teams are really going to go with the running back position. So hard to see how these are going to shake out.
I got a dynasty team coming off a championship, and my running backs are Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, and Dalvin Cook, and I've been trying to move Jacobs or Cook, and I just can't. Well, Jacobs I kind of want to hold because he's young, but I mean, it's really hard trying to get anything for Dalvin Cook right now.
Yeah, I have a dynasty team with Dalvin Cook as well, but I'm drafting early with this dynasty team, and my main need is going to be quarterback. I'm coming into the season with Tom Brady and Kyler Murray.
Oh,
we're gonna need to make some moves there. But so outside of running back, we'll move into wide receiver and talk about that. And another position that on paper is deep. But the thing is, up at the top of this wide receiver class, there's a lot of conjecture as far as who's the top guy. So who is your top guy as we come into the combine?
For me, it's Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, I just think he's just incredible.
I agree.
I mean, this guy was so good that Jameson Williams had to transfer to Alabama just to get on the field. I mean, he's so good that he was relevant. I mean, he was so good. He got on the field with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson,
who both have said that he was the best receiver out of the trio when they've both been interviewed about what he can possibly do at the next level.
Yeah.
They both agreed that he was the best wide receiver, pure wide receiver out of the three.
Yeah. I mean, this guy pretty much like set every record in Texas high school football. And so
Yeah.
I want to say he had like 27 touchdown receptions his last year in high school.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah. So, I mean, he had a hamstring injury that kind of lingered him all year, and then he got hurt again. And obviously, you know, I'm a Buckeye fan, so I try not to be biased, but I mean, I really think if he would have played that they probably, you know, I think they would have beat Georgia.
Yeah.
In my opinion, but sorry, Georgia fans, but
I have a lot more Alabama fans that listen to this podcast than Georgia fans.
I think what I like with JSN, I think he's so smooth, and he's not going to have that straight line speed. He's not a 4.4 guy.
No.
But he moves. His lateral quickness is just unmatched. And even watching his tape, like I can't remember the last time I saw a receiver that is so good that like the opposing guy who's covering him is running the other way because JSN just like shook the guy out of his shoes that they can't keep up with him.
Right.
So his win rates against man are just as good against zone. And a lot of people have said that he's just a slot receiver, but I kind of push back on that because I think he's only a slot receiver because their wide receiver room was so stacked. It was the only spot they could play him.
Right.
So
I mean, a lot of the same things we saw about Justin Jefferson coming into the draft cycle. Yeah, he's only a slot receiver. Yeah, I think that conjecture you can throw out the window with JSN. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, he's got this. He's got the size. I just think that look at Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown and JSN, if he ends up playing in the slot, I just think those guys are like going to change not only the fantasy community's opinion of slot receivers, but I think they'll change the NFL's opinion of slot receivers. Because you have so many teams that are running the too high safety, playing soft shell coverage now. So many teams have just basically said, we're going to try, we're not going to let you beat us for a 60-yard touchdown. We'll give you 5 yards here on the ground. We'll give you a short pass. Basically bank on getting a sack or you turning it over or you getting a holding penalty. That is how teams have approached. And so it's on the flip side, it's opened up things for someone like Devonta Smith, who, he can make big plays, but like he's just so good in the middle of the field. And I kind of see Jackson Smith and Jigba doing the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I had obviously my top wide receiver on the board. Just had my wide receiver scouting combine preview come out on rollerballer.com yesterday, so be sure to go check that out as well if you haven't already. But outside of him, and you get into the discussion of who's next off the board: Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson. Now you're having a lot of the Zay Flowers talk kind of coming into the fold as well. So a lot of these guys are just kind of hurdling over each other, and we just don't know who's going to be the top name coming out of this class right now. So where do you fall, as the next guys come down the board of this class here?
That's tough because I think Quentin Johnson has a ton of upside.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think Jordan Addison is such an immediate like plug and play guy. Like he can play the slot and he can play outside. And he's kind of proven it with like two different programs. I think my question with Addison is, what is his ceiling? Is he, I see him being a very good receiver. Can he be, it's hard because like Justin Jefferson is so good. I don't want to compare people to Justin Jefferson, but like, can he get on that level? You know what I mean?
He's very volume dependent from what I figure moving into the next level. I think he's going to be a guy that needs that high volume target share.
But at the same time, I think he can be very good. I think Quentin Johnson, he's kind of someone I want to see kind of show out at the combine this weekend. My issue with Zay Flowers is in the Senior Bowl, he measured at 5'9". So he was a little heavier. So I don't know if teams are going to see that as an issue. So I don't have a consensus like wide receiver 4. I mean, I feel like there's a big gap. I mean, there's, Josh Downs.
Kayshawn Booty is a guy that I
Yeah,
like too.
Booty.
That's really he's been lost in the shuffle because of how the 2022
Yeah.
season went for him down there in LSU.
I think Jalen Hyatt's going to have a big weekend because he's really fast. But I'll tell you, the guy that I've really been impressed with on tape was Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, I knew you were going to hit on it. Yeah,
I just watching his tape. He was giving me a little bit of Michael Thomas vibes.
I agree.
And they're almost like the exact same size too.
Yeah.
Why did he come back for his 2022? I felt like he was ready last year.
I think a lot of that was just, it was Heupel and really kind of had a grip on that program and convinced a lot of these guys to come back so they could prove a lot of the doubters wrong in 2022. They wanted to build on it, build this program up because, Tennessee football's been down in the dumps for the better part of the last 20 years. So I think they wanted to really kind of make a step forward. And then he gets that ankle injury early on in the season, and it was just nagging throughout the rest of the season. And you mentioned Jalen Hyatt. Jalen Hyatt takes off. He gets the ball, goes and wins the Biletnikoff, and he's the more talked about receiver coming into the combine. But I'm like you. I think Cedric Tillman, probably from a pro aspect, from a prospect outlook, I think Tillman's probably the more well-rounded player as you move into the next level.
Yeah. And I like what he can do. I'm kind of curious to see how he runs.
Mm-hmm.
But Hyatt, I don't feel like Hyatt was as polished as Tillman. I feel like he's not as good on some of the routes and stuff. And not to say that he can't, but I feel like Tillman's got a ton of deep speed. I'm looking at this PFF guy. They got Cedric Tillman comp to Brian Edwards. Don't do that to us. Don't do that to us, PFF.
God, I was such a big Brian Edwards mark coming into the league. I was really high on him. He disappointed me. I do not, don't put that stigma. Don't put that stigma on Cedric Tillman.
But he was impressive. So I think he's another guy that I think NFL teams are going to end up being higher on him than it seems.
Yep. But similar to I kind of in a similar way in the same program, Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer didn't really do a lot at Tennessee, although Tillman did great in 2021. Palmer was kind of slept on, in a very down offensive system for the Vols while Palmer was there. Had a great Senior Bowl, had a great combine, rose up the draft boards, and as we've seen, with the Chargers and the playing time that he's accrued, he's done really well for himself at the next level. I think Tillman's kind of the same mold there. I think he's going to be a guy that he's going to land in the right spot, and I think he's going to really kind of make a name for himself at the next level.
Yeah, I'm with you.
But Hyatt, I mean, that's the thing with him. When you saw him, he really took advantage of a lot of that open space. A lot of those bunch formations, there really wasn't a lot of press coverage on him, so you didn't really get to see him take off a release off of man coverage. And the one time you did was against Georgia, and they struggled. And so that's the thing that I'm going to be interested to see with Hyatt. He's going to have to really show that he can do things, develop more of a diverse route tree. I'm not sure that that's there right now. I think that's going to be something he's going to have to develop at the next level with some coaching. It's obviously I'm a little bit lower on Jalen Hyatt than the consensus right now, I think, which is unfortunate. I know a lot of folks have got him as a first-round pick. I'm not seeing it right now.
Lance Zierlein had him going to the Texans at 12. I was kind of surprised by that.
That's pricey.
Yeah.
It's all about need. I mean, that's something that we're talking about a lot through this podcast is what do you need and what's the player that can fit that the best. Texans obviously need a guy that can kind of lift the top off of a defense. Hyatt's a guy that can do that. So I think that's way early to go with him. I think honestly, in a perfect world, you could get a Hyatt in the second round, but we'll see how things play out there. But we keep mentioning it. It's deep, but not a lot of these guys are consensus one over the other.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe we'll see a little bit more of that this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We'll kind of start to maybe see some guys separate from the pack. Josh Downs, he's a guy from watching a lot of Sam Howell's tape last year I kept seeing him over and over and over. And I was
Yes.
like, man, who's this Josh Downs guy?
Yeah.
And I really like him, but another guy, he's only 5'10".
Right.
And I don't necessarily think that matters. I think 5'10" is kind of the cutoff. I think once you're under 5'10", maybe it can kind of be a little bit of a red flag. But I don't know. I don't know how these teams are going to look at it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Like you mentioned, we're going to see some guys that start to separate themselves, I think, from the pack as we get into the combine.
Even Rashee Rice, he was listed at 6'2" for like the last 2 years, and he got to the Senior Bowl, and then he was only 6 foot.
Oops.
So
yeah, you got to love the hometown teams giving them a little bit of the credit on the programs there, giving them some extra height. But I think that's what you're going to see with Bryce Young too once we get down to the nuts and bolts of it.
Right.
Speaking of size, though, Tank Dell, a guy that was really flashing at the Senior Bowl, really, really undersized wide receiver that's in this class. Obviously, going to be a lot of speed there with Tank Dell. What do you think about him here at the combine and then moving forward? Do you think he can improve his stock?
That's the kid from Houston, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he was at Alabama A&M before.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's tough. I mean, he's obviously a burner, but what is he? I mean, I think he listed at 5'10", 165.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's going to hit that mark.
So, he kind of seems like a boomer bust player, can kind of take the top off of a defense, like you're saying. But
yep.
I don't know. It's so hard to say. I feel like we're always looking for the next Tyreek Hill, but I feel like there's only one Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I mean that's what we're trying to make Kadarius Toney into that right now with the Chiefs too, and he can't stay healthy and stay on the field. And I think you see that a lot with these undersized guys that are really fast.
Yeah.
Is you get a lot of that soft tissue injury type guys and can't stay on the field and stay healthy.
Yeah, I mean maybe Tank Dell could be like a Deshaun Jackson type.
Yeah.
Maybe if somebody like that comes into the league now versus before,
could fit. Yeah, could fit with more kind of the today's passing offenses than they could say 10 years ago. For sure,
I think he's going to be more hesitant on scheme fit.
Yes, that I agree with. Want to touch on before we kind of wrap things up, just kind of gloss over real quick. But obviously, tight end, that's another position we talked about that has been really deep. A lot of potential there as well. What's how are things shaking out with tight end position for you?
The consensus I get, Michael Mayer's kind of the tight end one on everybody's board. I think teams just want to see how he's going to run this week.
Yep.
I think as long as he's in the 4.6s, he should be fine. I think if he runs like a mid 4.7 and some of these other guys show out, I mean, I can tell you now that this Luke Musgrave kid from Oregon State is going to jump out of the gym. I agree. He's limited in terms of his production because, like I said, 2020 kind of cut the Pac-12 short because of COVID, and he was hurt this year.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he's super athletic. Now I like Mayer because I think he's not someone that shies away from contact. He enjoys blocking.
Yeah.
So teams really like that.
Kind of more that Mark Andrews type.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of comps of Jason Witten to him. Some people have said mini Gronk, but I think that's only because of the 87.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've got him ahead. I do like this Dalton Kincaid kid from Utah. He's really impressed me.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of seems like more of a receiver though than kind of more of a natural tight end.
Right. More of a lot of people are wanting to comp him to Kelsey, but I kind of see him more of the Mike Gesicki type. Guy that you're going to want to split out wide and play more wide receiver type.
Yeah, and then we got this Darnell Washington kid out of Georgia that played next to Brock Bowers. Yeah, I mean they're saying he's 6'7", 270. Now, some people are saying, we can run a complicated scheme and he can sit back and pass pro. Well, let me tell you this: he might be 6'7", 270, which is big for a tight end, but that's not big for an offensive lineman.
No.
So, you think teams are really going to want to trust a 30 pound underweight, guy blocking edge rushers?
Right. Lined up against Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, I mean it works. I mean, it works in NCAA football. It works in Madden. It's not going to work in real life. I mean,
No,
not.
not at all.
But I am intrigued by Darnell Washington because I do feel like he has some untapped upside. Kind of curious to see how he runs this week.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a great run blocker, which teams are going to like. But I think people having these dreams that he's going to somehow be your sixth offensive lineman and block guys and in pass protection, it's not gonna work.
Right. No, not at all. Yeah, he's going to have to kind of develop a little bit more well-rounded game, I think, here at the next level. But I agree with you on Musgrave. I think he's a guy that's kind of slowly kept coming up my rankings at the tight end position. I like Sam Laporta too. Iowa's kind of been a tight end factory over the years. I think there's a little bit of promise there. He'll probably be more of a later selection in the draft, but I think he's a guy that can kind of come in. He might not make a dent in the NFL early on the first year or two, but I think there's a chance there he can develop.
Yeah, I mean that Iowa offense was a freaking abomination this year.
Oh, it was tough to watch.
I mean, so I don't know if anybody really could have put up a lot of value for fantasy.
Not at all. But yeah, it's kind of covering all the skill positions. That's really kind of what we wanted to do and do a preview as we got into the weekend with the scouting combine here. We got any other tidbits that you want to throw out there and before we sign off for the evening?
Maybe this is probably a good time. Maybe we'll see a trade coming up soon because obviously all the GMs are in Indianapolis, so they're all, talking. I remember John Snyder last year talking about how like a year before he had like drinks with George Payton at the combine and talking about, if you guys, we may be in the market to trade Russell Wilson, and they kind of planted the seeds like a year ahead of time.
Yeah.
So maybe something like that will happen. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I mean, I'd say the most interesting story of the offseason is definitely what happens with Lamar Jackson. You know?
I agree. I mean,
we kind of need to get some of these quarterbacks out of the AFC, man. Send them to the NFC.
Yeah, you got to spread the wealth a little bit. That's the thing right now. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of teams that are going to need to help over here in the NFC. I mean, but we'll find out really when March 15th rolls around, new league year hits, and that's when you're going to have a lot of movement start and kind of contracts come into play.
Right.
And then that's going to help a lot of the draft talk and mention trades and stuff like that as teams kind of really round into shape before the draft. It really gives them a better idea what their needs are going to be and what trades and what moves they're going to need to make. So that's
right.
We've definitely got a couple months ahead of us
for sure.
Discuss and talk about all these things, but let them know there, man. Kyle, let them know where to find you on Twitter and what all you got on the plate.
Yeah, luck is made FF. I got my YouTube channel, which I'm in the process of developing. Got some articles, stuff. I got my link tree on my website. So, yeah, happy to help anybody who's got questions, wants to talk draft, whatever. I'm always down to talk ball.
Definitely, man. And obviously we appreciated you coming on here tonight and doing a little combine talk. But outside of that, we will possibly be back after the combine is over with. We'll do a little bit of a review, talk about some of the tidbits that came out of the combine this weekend. But ladies and gentlemen, until then, we are signing off here with another episode of Woo Fantasy. And we're out.